welcome to the second episode of the Sydney Contrarian. The title of this episode is Property Prices. Is the interest rate stupid? Now, the topic of property prices is a popular one in social gatherings and there appears to be many different views held. But I think that the overwhelming majority hold the view that property prices pretty much goes up and it never comes down. It can only come down slightly if it ever does. To try and to argue that the prices can drop significantly and not recover for a very long time is an unpopular one, and those who dare to even utter it may be quickly silenced or laughed at. Proponents of property prices in Sydney being resistant to dropping or collapsing bring up reasons such as Sydney has a long-standing undersupply of properties relative to demand. There's limited land availability. There is potential growth in infrastructure to support more property development and therefore prices rising. And these issues seem to be pushed by the media, whether it's on TV, newspapers, ads, etc., on a very frequent basis. You almost feel that it's quite well accepted and hard to refute because you can always quote some newspaper article, some so-called experts, and so therefore you can't really argue with the experts, right? But what I'm going to show you in this video is that the property prices in Sydney are driven significantly by interest rates. The fact that loans are more readily available make it easier to pay off on the surface, and this leads to the demand for property increasing. Now, me being the Sydney contrarian, I am going to focus on Sydney property prices. And I'll also add to this that Sydney is an interesting city to look into because the market here has been quite robust and it's one of the few of the last cities left untouched by a crash or a major correction in the past 30 years. The other cities being Toronto and Vancouver, and even Vancouver recently, is shown to be facing a drop in property prices. Now, if you read the mainstream media, you're likely to be bombarded by articles on the Sydney property market being virtually bulletproof. Let us look at a few of what I would say a cherry-picked selection of these articles. So let's have a look at the ABC on the 30th of November 2016, which stated, booming Sydney property prices show no sign of slowing according to the latest private research. And also, news.com.au on Boxing Day 2016 put up a headline that spells out, Property 2017, Gold Coast set to boom, but still no end in sight for Sydney. And in mid-2015, the Australian Financial Review had an article that discussed at length why Sydney property prices still have 2 more years of growth. It is forecasting a 17% rise in Sydney house prices in the current financial year. Prices are already up 14% for the year to March according to CoreLogic RP data, followed by rises of 13% and 7% over the next 24 months. Now, all these headlines are occasionally punctuated by an odd article here and there warning that there may be a correction in property prices, but there is always this assurance that there will only be a soft landing, there will be a plateauing. In fact, the tone in these articles is almost like a mother taking her kid to the dentist for the first time and telling them it will only hurt a little. Just a little bit. Well, I'm sorry to say that the hard truth is that the Sydney property market is primed for a hard landing, but okay, the time and magnitude are unknown. The reason for this will be more evident, and I'll cover that in a later video. What people seem to forget is that properties are now often purchased with a bank loan, and prices are being further pushed up by Chinese foreign investors who are paying cash. This is a deadly combination since those who are borrowing are being forced to take bigger loans, and it is not helped by falling interest rate on borrowings. Now let's see how the Sydney house prices compare to the cost of a mortgage. Property prices are undeniably being pushed up over the past 30 years by falling mortgage rates. And it seems to be even more so when banks lowered borrowing rates below 8% in 1999 to 2001 period, and then again further more below 6% after the subprime crisis. Now, the same periods coincided with the dot-com bubble and also central banks around the world printing currency to save the major banks from collapsing in the subprime crisis. Now, Australia escaped the worst of the subprime crisis in 2008 to 2009, but this simply drove our property prices to sky-high levels because we never actually came down. We only just went up. Moving to the next figure, here is a relative growth of Sydney property prices and the average annual income of New South Wales adults. This diagram needs little explanation. Over the 16 years from 1986 to 2002, property increased fivefold, while income only doubled. And in the past 30 years, property prices have increased almost ninefold, while income only increased by about 3.5 times. There is little left to doubt as to why people argue that one should jump onto the property bandwagon as soon as possible, because it seems to be a faster way of growing one's wealth than working. This is even more so as the interest rate on borrowing fell at the turn of the millennium. This corresponded to savings rates being lower than 3%. The incentive for people to save becomes even less when it is low, and you can actually see this in my previous video. When you consider the power of compound interest, you see that it is virtually non-existent once interest rate falls below 3%. So young people are going to find it harder to save up for their first deposit, but banks suddenly come to the rescue and become more generous in extending them a hand by offering them lower rates on borrowing and higher borrowing limits. Oh, how kind of the banks. Or are they? The short answer is clearly no. Now brace yourself as you look at this figure. What I have for you is a historical difference between savings and borrowing rates over the past 35 years. Banks charge a higher interest rate when they lend to you and pay you a lower rate when you save with them so they can make a profit. Notice that the past 8 years since the subprime crisis, banks actually have experienced a higher sustained difference between what they charge us and what they pay us. It's no coincidence that they're making record profits year after year. You can think of it this way. Banks have taken out of your hand by paying you less on your savings. Then they work with the media and the government to tantalize you with the idea of owning your own home. Then they open up their coffers to lend you so you can realize that dream of yours that you thought was slowly going out of reach. But all the time, they are making record profits off you. Does that sound like a fair deal? You decide. Well, that is it from the Sydney Contrarian. Stay tuned for a future episode. Once again, God bless.